Hello, and thank you for joining the MMA Mic Drop podcast. My name is Jade Bunky, and I have a very special guest today. His name is James Lynch. He is an MMA journalist. He has an incredible show on the James Lynch YouTube channel. James, what a privilege it is to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for offering me to come on here, and happy to talk some fights with you, man.
Awesome. And if you've watched the show before, my co-host, Milo McGregor, he is not available right now. He probably will join us a little bit later. But let's get started. We came off of a really good fight card at UFC 299. A lot of big things went down. And so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about UFC 300. Are there a few tweaks that the UFC could make to get both casual fans and hardcore fans excited? So first, James, let me ask you this. Is Sean O'Malley a star, and how big of a star is he?
We'll find out. We'll see what the pay-per-view buys are, but the UFC certainly set him up for success with how stacked the UFC 299 card was. If you look at some of the names that were on the prelims, you had the Macy Barber and Caitlin fight, which was obviously on the prelims. You had Curtis Blaydes and Jailton Almeida, which could have easily been a main event. In fact, it was a main event in November prior to Curtis Blaydes getting an injury. You had Pedro Munoz and Kyler Phillips. It was just a very, very stacked event, and I think part of that was UFC's way of trying to prop up Sean O'Malley and try and make him into a star, because let's be honest, as far as American fighters go, it's been hard for the UFC to create sort of a big impact as far as stars. You look at some of the big stars for the UFC, Israel Adesanya, you look going back, George St. Pierre, Conor McGregor, they're not American. So I think it's been tough for them because there's so many other American athletes that people sort of look towards. And I think it's been harder. John Jones is probably the biggest one if you think about it in MMA. So I think with Sean O'Malley, they did a good job sort of setting him up here. And Sean delivered on that promise because he put on a really good performance in the main event, basically shutting out Chito Vera over 5 rounds. It's about as dominant of a win as you're going to get without getting a finish.
Yeah, I mean, it was a striking masterclass, and you're right. They definitely set him up for success. He absolutely delivered, and I got to say, Cheeto, what a chin! My goodness, that knee to the face was, that would have put anybody down. And it is interesting, though. You talked about pay-per-view buys, so I would ask you, when you define a star, do you define it in terms of their popularity, their ability to sell, or is it a combination of both?
I think we need to define like star, superstar. I think because there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. I think O'Malley, to a certain degree, is a star in the UFC. They're not going to put him in a main event if they didn't feel like he was going to, sell tickets. And certainly this was a bigger card that they put together. So I'd say he's a star. Now, is he a superstar? I think there's some casual fans who know who he is. One of the areas that O'Malley has done a great job with is identifying the younger audience, sort of the YouTuber audience, the streaming audience. You see O'Malley, doing a lot of the interviews with like the streamers and stuff. And that's something that has certainly translated in terms of his fan base. And that's an area that UFC really hasn't capitalized on. I know they have some ways of kind of connecting with that fan base. So I'd say Sean is a star, but he's not like a Conor McGregor superstar. He may never be Conor McGregor superstar because again, it's very hard to do what Conor does. Conor does 3 things, and so does George St. Pierre and all these other people. Conor comes from somewhere that doesn't have a lot of star power, like in Ireland. If you think of, other big athletes, they're just like from someone who lives in North America, I live in Canada. I can't think of any. Conor McGregor is probably one of the biggest ones. So there's that. The second thing is Conor McGregor is a hell of a self-promoter. Sean O'Malley admittedly has said at press conferences and even just in interviews, he's not the greatest guy on the mic when it comes to stuff. He'll have his lines, but Conor was just sort of born with that. And the third thing is something that O'Malley does have down, and that's being an exciting fighter. I don't know how you watch that fight on Saturday and not get entertained. He's had a lot of knockouts. Chito Vera had never been knocked out in the UFC, so that was a tall task for O'Malley to go out there and finish him. So I'd say O'Malley's a star, but he's not a superstar. And I am curious to see what the buy rate's like, because again, the UFC did set him up very well. So you'd think the buy rate's going to be good, but if it's not good, then you got to wonder, like, is he really as big of a deal as some of his fans are making him out to be?
Yeah, and with more performances like that, the fighting will obviously do the talking over time. If he can sustain that. And I think, what's interesting, I think with him, there are some missed opportunities, right? He got on the mic right after the fight, and it would, everybody wanted him to call out Merab, right? And I think when you call out Poirier, I think that's a mistake, but I think he could have also done something that could have been interesting. He could have called out Merab and say, hey, I want my jacket back. We're not only fighting for the belt, we're fighting for the jacket. That would have been hilarious. That would have got people engaged. And I think part of it is he needs to do a better job reading the room, or not reading the room per se, but reading what fans want to a certain extent, because you want him to be authentic, right? You don't want to necessarily force anything, but I think a lot of talk, after his last win, he was talking about fighting a boxer, and then he was fighting about Poirier. engage with the fans in the area that they want. And, everybody wants to see him fight Merab. I think, some of that promotion is right there for him if he just addresses the subject at the right subject at the right time. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, exciting fighter, and it will be interesting to see how big he can get. Yeah. Now also, we had, Dustin Poirier, Benoit Saint-Denis. My goodness. Poirier showed us what he always shows us, right? And we know where he is and, what a legend he is. What about Benoit Saint-Denis? That's what I wanted to ask you. How good do you think he could be? Was this an aberration? He gasped pretty badly. It looks like he had staph infection before the fight and so forth. And, he's saying that people are saying that may have drained him. What are your general thoughts on Benoit Saint-Denis?
I think it's one of those rare fights, and I know some fans will disagree with me saying this, but I actually think his stock raised a little bit because he brought it to Poirier. He made it an entertaining fight, and I always tell this to people who are critical of Benoit Saint-Denis and him losing on Saturday. Who do you think won that first round? It was him. He looked great, and he went to Poirier. He got him down on the ground. He looked good. He got finished, and his striking defense is certainly something that will catch up to him if he does get higher in the division at this point. But going from Matt Frevola and Thiago Moises to a Dustin Poirier is a pretty big leap, and I think this is a good learning experience for him. I brought up the example on my show about when Yair Rodriguez fought Frankie Edgar. It looked like two fighters in completely different hemispheres as far as where they rank in the division. If you remember that fight, it was a couple years ago. Edgar totally, it was dominant. He made Yair look like he didn't belong in there. I don't think Benoit Saint-Denis looked like he didn't belong in there with Poirier. I think he did. He just made some mistakes and ultimately it cost him the knockout loss. But you got to imagine the UFC thinks very highly of Saint-Denis for a couple of reasons. Number one, they continuously go to France every year now that's been sanctioned there. So he's someone they can use. Two, he's really entertaining. I don't know how you watch that fight and go like that was one of the best 2-round fights I've seen in a while. You have to go back to maybe Yuri Prohaska and Dominic Reyes as far as a good 2-round fight that didn't last that long, but I was extremely entertained by that. And, he doesn't even need a good personality because you were just talking about there, let the fighting do your talking. I think Saint-Denis does that. He's not even that great on the mic. I couldn't even tell you a quote he said at all, during fight week, but I do remember that fight. So I think for him, listen, a setback, but I think, if they give him the right opponent next, don't feed him to the Sharks again, give him an opponent that he will probably go out and finish and then slowly work him back up. And then you're right. Let's see how he looks when he doesn't have the staff. But I always bring this up anyways. Fighters aren't 100% when they go in. So yes, I'm sure the staff did impact his cardio. I saw a lot of fans sort of take that the wrong way as if he was sort of discrediting Poirier. It's no, that's why, because people were questioning his cardio. And I'm well, that's why. It's not like he didn't train properly for this fight. It's that staph infection. Kevin Lee had staph when he fought Tony Ferguson, and it was certainly an impact in that fight where Kevin Lee, after round 2, looked like he run like a marathon. So I think for to answer my long-winded answer to your question is, I think with Saint-Denis, they have something. I see, just from the eye test, I see potential in him. And I think this loss will only make him better in the long run as he sort of, is young enough at 28 where he can really, this loss doesn't really hurt him that much.
Yeah, and that wasn't long-winded at all. That was quite insightful. And what was really interesting is that he's the first person, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, he's the first person that I saw bully Dustin Poirier. People have beat him. He bullied him. I've never seen anybody do that to him. And I was blown away because, I'm with you. I'm this is a big step up in competition, right? Poirier is coming off a loss. He's coming off, he's getting older. Is it, one guy's going up, is one guy going down? Are they meeting at the right time? But what he showed me in that first round was remarkable. And some of the things are fixable, like his striking defense. That is fixable. Cardio, if it's due to staff, that is, fixable. But I'm pretty excited. Who would you match him up against next?
So I was thinking about this, and a lot of people were already throwing out Dan Hooker and all these other names. Someone said Fiziev in my chat today. I'm you just lost. He's not going to fight up the rankings. I would think he's going to fight down. There's a couple ones. Maybe you get the winner of Bobby Green and Jim Miller. That's at the UFC 300, a veteran there. And another name I thought that I think actually makes sense is Rafa dos Anjos. He lost again on the weekend. He's getting up there in age. He's a former champion. I think with Rafa, I tend to feel this way with the UFC is when they have a veteran, like a former champ that's still sticking around and they're still older, use him to build up other guys. Yeah. With Tony Ferguson and Paddy Pimblett. I think you could do the same thing here with Benoit Saint-Denis and Rafa dos Anjos. I think, as far as rankings go, that it's pretty, I don't even know where RDA is in the rankings because he's fought at welterweight as well. But I think but I think that makes sense because I think that's a winnable fight for him. Yes. I also don't think it's going to be like a cakewalk like he's had with some of his other fights because as we know, RDA is tough to finish. If you look at, I think the last stoppage loss he has, I want to say was Fiziev, and it was late in the fight. It was the 5th round. So he's not going to have that luxury. I would do a fight night card, Rafa dos Anjos, Benoit Saint-Denis on like a fight night card, and you give Saint-Denis that high profile thing. Did he learn from the Poirier fight? He's fighting another veteran. Can he pass the test? And subsequently for RDA, can he beat an up and comer? He just lost to Gamrot. Last time I checked, Gamrot was the backup at UFC 294 to fight for the title, so that's not a bad loss for him. How much does he have left? So I think that's a fight that could really make sense.
Yeah, I like that. And what we'll do for all of you watching, we're going to go through 2 more fights at UFC 299, and then we're going to jump into UFC 300. MVP, I was blown away with the MVP performance. I've never seen Kevin Holland really outmatched to that extent on his feet. We've seen him get bullied on the ground, when he was up at middleweight against Vittoria, against Cannonier. But I've never seen anybody do that to him in the striking. What are your thoughts about MVP, and what do you think is next for him?
Yeah, so that was, I agree. He looked very good on Saturday night. We do have to mention that Kevin Holland is not exactly someone that's, really going to test you in that division. Holland, self-admittededly is, Mr. I'll take a fight and, I'm going to get paid well and all this stuff. And, he's not really someone that I think, I don't want to I don't want to be too critical, but I'll just say that Kevin Holland's not someone that I think is a threat in the division. I mean, we know the blueprint to beat him. Yes, he fought another striker. I would argue maybe Stephen Thompson kind of took it to him in the striking, but that was a fight where he broke his hand. So it was a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this was kind of a good opportunity for Holland to seize, and he didn't seize it. He fought an older fighter, a fighter that I still argued has not fought great competition coming in here. I mean, nothing against Bellator, but like a Logan Storley, I don't think is a ranked middleweight or ranked welterweight in the UFC at this point, right? So as good as he is,
it's a different level for sure.
Yeah, and so I think with MVP, this worked out all well. I'm sure the UFC's happy. Obviously, a lot of people are interested in MVP. I'm seeing a little bit of talk on social media about a contender and all. I don't know about that yet. I think a Jeff Neal would make sense. I want to see him fight someone that's well-rounded, that's not just going to strike with him. Neal's got some wrestling as well. He's got good jiu-jitsu. Yes, he's coming off a loss against Ian Gary. But it was a fight where I don't think Gary was in any, wasn't in putting Jeff in any danger. And then Jeff Scott wins over Luque and stuff. So, I think it's a good test here. You got 2 older veterans, so to speak, fighting each other. Another name that came to mind was maybe Sean Brady. He needs an opponent. He was supposed to fight Vicente Luque. I don't really know what's happening with Brady right now, but that's a good one too, because if Brady wins, then you keep moving him towards a title. And if MVP beats Brady, then he is legit as far as I'm concerned. The problem with him fighting Kevin Holland is I think a lot of welterweights beat Kevin Holland. And I just think that there's a weakness there. There's a bit of kind of trash talking and goofing around in the cage a little bit. He didn't really show it that much this weekend, but I just thought it was surprising that a guy who's that much younger could not be faster in the cage and not land more shots on an older MVP.
Well, and that to me was the most striking thing. At age 36, I was blown away with his speed. I absolutely blown away. You're not supposed to be that quick, at that age. And, personally, I'd like to see him fight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Do you think the styles, though, that, maybe too similar, that it might not be as exciting as some fans might think? Because for me, that's the fight I'd like to see.
Okay, so the reason I didn't bring him up is because he's been in multiple interviews saying he won't fight him. They have the same management.
Oh, really?
I guess they became friends at Karate Combat as well. No, honestly, I've had so many people say MVP Wonderboy. But listen, if that fight was going to happen, they would have done that for his debut. That would have made more sense, because that would have been at least Thompson already has a win over Holland. Wouldn't that have made more sense, so to speak? The thing with Thompson, unfortunately, is again, there's a way to beat Stephen Thompson now. Thompson, as great as he is, he's getting up there in age. I almost as weird as this sounds, I know Thompson has a win over Jeff Neal, but I almost feel as though if he beat Neal, that would tell us more about where he fits in the division. I think with Wonderboy, he's always got his striking, but at some point, we saw in the Shavkat fight, he's not a contender anymore. I want to see him tested. He's 36. They're going to try and move him up as quickly as they can, but I'd rather get those answers now instead of, because I think he beats a Wonderboy. I do. I think he outstrikes him. I think Wonderboy, as great as he is, I think he's slowed down a little bit. He's not what he used to be. I think a Jeff Neal or a Magny or a Vicente Luque or Brady would be better options for him as far as a test next.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting. You got to ask yourself, does the UFC want him to entertain, or do they want to see how good he is, right? If they want him to entertain, they put him against strikers, right, that are higher level, watch him move through the rankings, so he can get a couple fights before he gets too old. Or if they want to test him, you maybe put him up against a grappler, you put him against a Sean Brady, you see, or a Jeff Neal, somebody who's well-rounded. So, definitely interesting matchups. And the last thing we'll talk about for UFC 299, what are your thoughts about JDM, Jack Della Maddalena? Where do you think he goes from here?
Good win, very good win, finishing Gilbert Burns. I thought the fight was close. I think if Gilbert Burns would have held on a couple minutes longer, he might be taking a decision. That third round was really close. I thought it was 1-1 going into the third. I think the only thing, like, as impressive as that finish was, there is a bit of concern with how many times Gilbert Burns was able to take Jack Della Maddalena down. Like with like a seasoned guy, like I shouldn't say seasoned, but a guy that's like maybe like a little bit more mobile, like a Sean Brady, for example. Like, I think that's not a good fight for Jack if he's fighting a wrestler. Like, that is a bit of a concern because Gilbert Burns is not really, I know he did it to Wonder Boy in their fight, like he sort of took him down and everything, but that's something at the championship levels. Like, he called out Shavkat, which I think, like, you talk about good call-outs. Very good call out, because like that's what you need to do if you want to get to the title. You need to fight guys like that. Don't do what Colby's doing, which is I'm going to fight Wonder Boy. Like, no one wants to see that. They want to see the best fight the best, and Shavkat is the best. And I know Shavkat kind of snarled at him and was kind of like, I got my opportunity first. But yeah, like, I don't know how that fight would go. I think Shavkat is very good about getting fighters to the ground. So that's where, I'm interested to see if that's something that was just in this fight. Like, maybe he wasn't. I mean, he had to have expected Gilbert was going to take him down because he's got good jiu-jitsu. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I was kind of like, I think it was impressive that he finished Burns, because people talk about Burns having some bad chin. Burns has only actually been finished once at 170. He got finished at 155 against Dan Hooker, but a lot of that was him cutting too much weight and he was more susceptible to getting knocked out. So I think that was a very good win. And I think it was just a mistake on Burns. He went for a takedown. It was a perfect knee. Like, a more extreme example of what we saw with JDM finish on Burns is Jorge Masvidal and Ben Askren, where it's same thing, go for a takedown, get kneed in the head. Yeah. And then it was the beginning of the end there. So as far as what I think of Jack, I think the fact that he's undefeated, the fact that he's now got a number of good wins here, he's slowly getting into that contender spot. I just wonder, like with the Shavkat, the takedown thing is the only sort of nitpicking part, but I feel like he can fight for a title one day. I do feel that way.
Yeah, and when you look at it, he's 16-2 and 16-0, and he's won 16 in a row, and his only 2 losses were when he was a teenager. I mean, that's exactly. That's pretty insane when you think about it. I think Shavkat might be too much of a tall order. I mean, right now you got to give him credit. I mean, what a ballsy call out. No one's calling out Shavkat. Yeah. I would like to see him against maybe Ian Gary. I would like to see him, against one of the other prospects, maybe like Sean Brady. But what are your thoughts on, prospects fighting each other, right now? I mean, he's getting at that. Some of them are, rising up the ranks so quickly, they got to start fighting each other. What are your thoughts about that?
So I think it's, you got to also look at like where JDM's from. He's Australian, right? And they typically go back there. Like, I always think of things like this from a business perspective. Like, they have done a very strategic job of Ian Gary and building him up the way they built him up. And obviously Jeff Neal was I think Jeff Neal was his best win. I know he's beat Magny as well, but I think Neal was probably better in terms of just the old well-roundedness and stuff. So I tend to not think, because someone also said, will Ian Gary fight MVP? I don't think so. I think they're going to keep, like, they'll give Gary someone in that top 5, like, I don't know who, like maybe like Usman, is he coming down or not? Like, what's happening with him at 170? I think he's sort of the wild card there. Remember, Brady and JDM were booked to fight each other before. Now, Brady beat Gaslam, obviously, and then JDM's, I think, beat 2 opponents, or 3 opponents, actually, Holland, Basil Hafez, and now obviously Gilbert Burns. So I would say Jack is ahead of Brady, but that's a fight they could revisit because they were going to do it before. I don't know. Like, honestly, like I'm kind of perplexed at what they do. The other wild card here is Colby. Like, Colby's got to fight someone. I do wonder if they do that, or I was even thinking maybe they do Colby and MVP just because they're 2 older guys with decent name values. Like, I don't know. I think right now we need to see what the UFC's next move is, A, with the title fight, and B, like, what's going on with Shavkat. Like, there's so many things that have to fall into place, and then I think everything will happen. But I really don't know. I think it's going to be something that maybe we're not expecting.
Yeah, and it would be interesting. Colby versus JDM in Perth. You give him that older winnable fight in his hometown. He's from Perth, and I believe the UFC is going there later in the year.
Yeah, I mean, that could happen. The question is Colby going to take it? Because here's the thing with Colby. He's yet to fight an up-and-comer. He doesn't have a single ring right now, right? So that's the question. Like, I even wonder if we're ever going to see Colby fight again. Because I think if it's not Wonder Boy or some decent name, because he's been very strategic, right? It's been Masvidal and Robbie Lawler and all these other names that are older fighters. Yeah. I don't know if he's willing to fight like a Gary. Like, I think if he wanted to fight Ian Gary, I know he said it in interviews, I think that fight would have happened. Like, they would have booked it already. I tend to think it's not going to happen for some reason.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so let's move on to UFC 300. Now, UFC 300 is interesting because it's supposed to be the biggest event of all time. It's a stacked card. They have the sellable points point to casuals, in that you have more former champions on this card than any other card in history. But a lot of hardcores are not happy. Let me just start with the main event. I think the main event is absolutely appropriate. I love the matchup, Hill versus Pereira. I don't know if you agree or
disagree.
I love it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's going to be one of the fights of the year for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. Yeah, and I think Hill's going to surprise a lot of people, given how much time he has, completely recovered, if he's completely recovered from his injury. My question is, to you is, are there a couple tweaks the UFC could make still to enhance it? Are there some, crazy ideas that you have? Are there some things around the edges you think the UFC should do, or do you think it's perfect the way it is?
I don't think they're going to change anything. I think the last thing they did was add that other fight, which is Moicano and Jalen Turner. That is going to, that the card's set. Here's the thing. Like, I don't disagree with you about, and we sort of agreed on the Jamahal Hill. I mean, all the fights are great. Like Dana even said, they're all main events. They could be main events on other cards.
Yes.
The issue is Dana did not hype it up like that. He hyped it up like this is something we've never seen before. And this is whatever. Like, yes, he was right in terms of the bout order, but the main event, like that's like, you almost expected something that you weren't expecting, whether it was like, I don't know, GSP coming back, or like I guess they tried to do Leon and Islam or something like that. That goes beyond just like a fight that we would think would normally happen. And I know they did the BMF title fight, but the issue is like Jamahal Hill and Alex Pereira, as great as fight of it is, and I'm looking forward to. I'm actually going to cover the card, so I'll be there in a couple weeks, which is going to be good. But it's like an expected fight. Like we knew that Alex Pereira was going to fight Jamahal Hill. I think that's where I see a lot of fans saying like, "Well, people are just complaining for the sake of complaining." No, the issue is Dana hyped this up. This is something we'd never seen before, but we knew that Alex Pereira and Jamahal Hill were going to fight. So that's the issue. Is like, I think that, and we know that John Jones did an interview recently where he's like, the UFC asked me to headline the card. Like, this was like the equivalent of like you doing your homework at the last minute. That's what happened. And I think the UFC, because they do so many events, they kind of pin themselves into a corner as far as options for UFC 300. Now, look, I'm not going to complain one bit about the card, but like, I do understand fans being critical of it because Dana was like, this is something you've never seen before. Yeah, we expected Jamahal Hill and Alex Pereira to fight each other, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think it was definitely oversold. I think there's still, I think for me, it's the main event and co-main event combo, right? Yeah. Because as much as we want to see Weili fight, the Weili mixed with Pereira versus Hill, I don't think has the buzz. Like if it was Hill and Pereira and Adesanya versus
DDP, which they tried to do apparently, yeah.
They tried to do that. So imagine you have those two, that's just adding one more fight. All of a sudden, that has the hype, right? That has the excitement. Yeah. Now, you obviously can't do that now. So I want to throw out a couple wild ideas for you. I know you got to go, so let me just let me know when you got to run. But okay, so these are some crazy ideas. Milo's going to join us later. He'll probably have crazier ideas. What if you did something like Max Holloway versus Poirier, put Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler, and take away that BMF title fight? What are your thoughts on that? I know that's a crazy thing.
Well, Gaethje already beat Chandler, right? Not that long ago. So yes. I don't think they do that. But I agree. Like Gaethje against someone. I mean, realistically, like that's part of the issue I have with the card too. Like, Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje is an amazing fight, but like talk about terrible timing. Like we could be doing Max and Ilya right now. That could have been a fight. We could have been doing Justin Gaethje against Islam in June, which we now know that Islam is wanting to fight in June. That card's in the Middle East. They could easily do that fight now, but they can't because they've made this fight for a BMF title. Look, I think BMF title is cute. It's like kind of like a fun thing to talk about, but it's really meaningless at the end of the day. It's not a real title, So I just think that like, yeah, I don't like, I'll say this, they're not going to do any changes. Like the card is set. They're not going to, it's too late. They have bout agreements. Like Gaethje's in camp, Holloway's in camp. They're prepared to fight each other. I think what is set is set. The thing I'd be keeping an eye on is International Fight Week. That's coming up in end of June. What are they going to do for that? Because that's typically a big card. It doesn't, I mean, Connor's hinted that he's going to be back there, but I don't believe anything Connor says now. I don't know what they're going to do. I wonder what the cards are going to look like going forward, because they've stacked this card so much top to bottom, what's left? And who's going to fight? You're probably going to have some situations where fighters are going to be competing on short notice. And it's not going to go so well for their careers, right? So that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, and just going back to the Gaethje Holloway, it's kind of interesting because it is a mega fight, it is a super fight, and it's one of those things. Though I think a lot of hardcore fans are not that excited for it because Holloway's a fan favorite, moving up a weight, and we saw what happened weight class, and we saw what happened last time. People are People don't want to watch their fan favorite lose if that's whatever. And not that Holloway's going to lose. I think Holloway has a pretty good chance. I think that's one of the problems with the Gaethje Holloway matchup. I've seen the UFC, make short notice fights. I'm wondering if they're going to do anything even around the edges. They are marketing it like it is set. So we will see. Well, Milo is going to come up in a few minutes. He's going to give his thoughts. He has some crazy ideas. We're going to have fun. We're going to play with UFC 300 a little more. James, I do know you need to go. I want to thank you so much for your time. For everybody watching, we're going to put a link to his show down below, to his channel. You really have to watch it. It is probably the best show in terms of audience engagement. So if you want to go onto a live chat, you want to watch somebody read every single question, rifle off, responses on the fly, very intelligently, very insightfully. It is a really fun thing to do. I've joined the show a few times, so please join it. And James, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Jade, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you having me. We'll have to do this again. Lynch on Sports. That's where you can find me. Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Everything's Lynch on Sports. I just keep it simple. Thanks again for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I am back. And once again, let me just a sincere thanks to James Lynch. Really appreciate his time. And also for all of you watching, please take a moment to check out his content. It's really good content. And again, really check out the live chat. I think he is really incredible at that. And I think you'll enjoy interacting with him and so forth. Now, right now, though, we have joining the show, the one and only Milo McGregor, who is not only one of the nation's top up-and-coming competitive young surfers, but also an MMA analyst. Milo, what's up?
What's up?
Yeah.
What's up, Jade?
All right. So, Milo, James and I, we were just talking about UFC 299 and UFC 300. I'm going to ask you a couple ideas that you have to share, a couple ideas that you have about UFC 300. Because I think we're close to making it truly epic. And I just think there's a couple adjustments to make around the edge. I threw out a crazy idea in my conversation with James. But before doing so, we just finished watching UFC 299. And I know, you do chat with Cheeto from time to time when you see him out in the water. And I know you were super bummed about the result of UFC 299. Do you want to talk to me about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wasn't really surprised. I knew Sean got a lot better. Mm-hmm. So I would actually be surprised if Cheetah won that, but I was still rooting for him because, I don't know, he's he's local. I surf with him, so I have to root for him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And he's such a cool guy, and he's such, and probably the toughest guy in the game. I mean, dude, taking that knee, that was incredible. And, we were all rooting for him. And, James is a real journalist. Neither Milo nor myself are journalists, and we're completely biased. We root for people we like. We root for people who live near us and so forth. So, that it was a bummer to watch him lose, but it was, a real, great performance by Sean O'Malley.
Yeah.
But let's move over to, to UFC 300. One of the things, I mentioned to James was, hey, I would love to see them, still throw in Ilia Topuria against Max Holloway, right? Because that would be the perfect co-main event, given that Topuria didn't take too much damage. And, obviously the problem is, contracts are signed, they're, Gaethje and Holloway are fighting, and that is a legitimate mega fight. But I'm thinking, in terms of fan interest, I think, that, a Topuria and Holloway fight is more interesting. You might have some crazy ideas, but in talking to you right before we went on again live, is that you do have some non-crazy ideas. So talk to me about that. What would you do to UFC 300, adding maybe just one more fight or two more fights to make it insane?
Yeah. I added two more fights that I would have had. I did Umar Nurmagomedov versus Corey Sandhagen. And then I did Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blaydes, even though it's going to be a late turnaround for Curtis Blaydes.
Yeah, and when you told me that's interesting. That's so interesting because Curtis Blaydes did not take any damage, right, at all. It's a 1 month turnaround. We know Tom Aspinall is ready. You throw that on the main card at UFC 300, all of a sudden people are a lot more excited, a lot more hyped just with that fight. And if you add on Nurmagomedov and Sandhagen, I mean, that would be incredible. I don't know where Sandhagen's health is, and I know he had an injury. I don't know where he is, but I mean, Nurmagomedov would be a great guy to watch. On a big card. I think the other thing that the UFC really needs to do is, I think part of the problem is the Bo Nickel matchup. I don't have a problem with Bo Nickel on the main card. I have a problem with Bo Nickel on the main card versus Cody Brundage. I think, and it's not that he has to face a top-ranked guy at UFC 300, but we know he's just going to run through Cody Brundage. So therefore, that fight's not that interesting. And so that's one of the things. You put him against somebody who's maybe in that 20 to 15 division where you're like, hey, this is a really big step up in competition. Brundage is a small step up in competition from his previous opponents, but it's nothing. But he's not a world beater. I mean, he's hanging on by the thread to the UFC roster still. And so I think if you had maybe just one of those fights, a last minute fight, I love the idea of, Curtis Blaydes versus Tom Aspinall, run that one back. Aspinall was injured, right in the opening moments of that fight. And, you would allow the heavyweight division to, continue to move forward. You change the opponent with, with Bo Nickel. Don't know how realistic that is or anything, but you make those two tweaks, and all of a sudden, everybody's excited. So and with that said, UFC 300 is absolutely stacked. I mean, I looked at the prelims the other day. I mean, it's the best prelims I've ever seen in my life, and the main card's stacked as well. And I love the Jamahal Hill Alex Pereira fight. I do think Jamahal Hill is going to show up, and I think he might surprise some people. And I did mention that when I was talking with James as well. But I think it's just missing a little bit of sizzle, and and I think that could be changed with just one or two fight modifications or one more fight addition. I do like the addition with Moicano and Jalen Turner. I thought that was a great addition to the prelims. I'm incredibly excited about that. What are your overall thoughts on UFC 300 with or without the additions you suggested?
I mean, no matter what, it's already probably the greatest, like, I don't know. It's probably the greatest fight card ever. So
good. It tied up your tongue a bit. I see. Wow.
Yeah.
Somewhat speechless.
I was trying to think of a word for it, but yeah.
Awesome. No, it's an incredible fight card. I mean, I'm incredibly excited. We're all, excited for that. It's, I just think there's still an opportunity to do a little bit to get a lot more out of it. But with that said, let's move on to this next segment, Kicking It with Milo. This is where we get an opportunity to learn a little more about Milo. Milo, do you have a big contest coming up this weekend? Is that correct, or is it the following weekend?
Yeah, I have this weekend. I have two competitions. I have one Saturday, and then I have another separate one Sunday. But for the one that's Saturday, I'm second place in the ranking. So if I win this event, I can go to first and win the whole entire season.
Oh, nice.
So that's the goal.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what organization is it?
NSSA.
Oh, really? You can win.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that's one of the big ones. Wow. Okay. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, good luck in that. Wait, where's that contest?
I think it's in Oceanside.
Okay. Not too far. Yeah. About an hour away.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, good luck with that. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's move into our last segment. Kook of the week, and I'm going to go first. Because I have a very easy Kook of the week. It is the referee who did not call or did not stop the fight between JDM and Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns was defenseless. I mean, he was taking unnecessary damage. And I know it's always tricky for referees to figure out, when's that right time to stop a fight. But come on, I mean, that guy took way too much damage. And that was disappointing to see that he did not stop that soon enough. That is my Kook of the week. Milo, do you have a Kook of the week?
I mean, I didn't really have one, but I remember seeing that happen and him getting blasted in the face. So, yeah, I guess I'm just going to have to go with you.
All right. Well, hey, thank you all for joining us. And stay tuned for our next show next week. And Milo, do you have a last word?
Drop the mic.
We're out.